That's a perfect segue. I do have jokes. I shouldn't give them away so soon, though.
I do have jokes.
All right. I got one. What is a CISO, security information security officers, what are his two biggest fears? His or hers, I guess. Yeah, everyone who works at the company and everyone who doesn't.
Dude, that's so accurate. It's scary. That's a joke, but it's not really a joke.
So hopefully you all are here thinking about the future and a possibility of a data breach, having and not having unfortunately gone through that yourselves. But I'm not naive. I have my ear to the ground. Unfortunately, we have in the K12 space just a number of cybersecurity risks that are going on. So what I'm going to talk through today is not so much prevention of a data breach, although we're always interested in that from the security side, but also a little bit of containment. So in security, we talk about before, during, and after. This is a little bit of during, right? What controls can we put in place? What kind of monitoring could we put in place to identify that a breach has happened and limit its damage, limit the scope of what somebody might have access to. So I did some thorough research by going to google.com or actually duckduckgo.com because I am that user, and looking for K12 breaches. So I stumbled across this K12 Cyber Security Resource Center. If you Google it, I'm sure you'll find it too. Can't verify their authenticity. But honestly, I didn't feel like I needed to. I think there's probably enough experience, and you have peers with other schools in the state that this is going on as well, right? So they reported, their data says since 2016 they've collected 1,180 incidents, and those incidents can be classified in a couple different ways. We've got ransomware. We've got unauthorized breaches, right? So that's kind of a generic term we can throw around. But the important part was these breaches actually resulted in disclosure of personal data, right? So now we get to the uncomfortable part of having to, tell staff, students, parents, the community, that we've gone through this, so maybe taking the sting out of a data breach is limiting the scope to where we haven't actually disclosed any personal data. Maybe somebody gained access to our resources, but they weren't able to access personal data resources or something along those lines. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Phishing attacks, right? These are out there. Seems like millions or billions probably go out each day via email and other forms of communication. But again, these ones were ones that resulted in disclosure of personal data. We also have DDoS, which I think we did a segment 2 years ago on that. We've just kind of seen a rise in different kids honestly have access to triggering some kind of DDoS attack. I don't know that it's necessarily right. Some covert unit in North Korea targeting K12s, but it's a term I heard recently: compromise as a service, or you can go to different websites and just say, "Hey, DDoS me." And so if I'm looking to get out of a test or something like that, I can give them my credit card. Wouldn't advise that, but you can. And for $10-20, I can get out of that test, right, and get a DDoS attack. And so just the ease of accessing some of these things is stunning sometimes. Anyway, then we have just other some other kind of cybersecurity thing that happened that resulted in a service disruption for these schools. So if you go and Google this K12 Cybersecurity Resource Center, you'll see, you can go and kind of drill down into our little neck of the woods here in Indiana. And all this is publicly available information and news reports and that kind of thing. and you might recognize some of the schools that are out there. So at least from that perspective, it seemed like legitimate data to me. They said, I didn't put this down, but around 400 of those occurred in 2020. It's been an increase over time. We're seeing more and more activity, which is why I want to talk about it today, and taking the sting out of these breaches. And I heard a pretty fun story recently. What is a breach? What's the nature of a breach? If you want to dig into that a little bit, there's a great podcast, and I imagine some of you have some windshield time coming up. So this might be a good one to turn on the way home. It's called Net Diaries. And I forget the gentleman that runs it, but he does a great job he's more of a storyteller. It's not like a technical deep dive into what happened. Obviously, we get into the technical of how they did. But he will interview different hackers. I'll jump to the end of this story. The hacker gained access to government systems, and that threw off some alarms that eventually landed that hacker in jail. So this guy went and interviewed him and wanted to hear his story about what he did. And in some cases, hackers are very happy to gloat about how they did what they did and share their story. So Net Diaries is the name of the podcast. Check that out if you want a little IT entertainment, we'll say. But this story is about a man named David Pecora and a friend of his, I don't know his first name, but Wheeler. They end up meeting online through the dark web and start a Xbox hacking kind of relationship, friendship. They become known as the Xbox Underground, which is a group of people that did some hardware hacks on the original Xbox. Eventually moved into software hacks on the 360. They're very active in forums. They ended up hacking one of these forums and got the user credentials to an employee at Epic Games. Now, would this employee at Epic Games possibly have the same username and password for this forum that they use on their corporate website? Can't imagine that would ever happen to anybody, but lo and behold, that's exactly the way it was. They had the same username and password on the forum that they used for the corporate website. So David Pecora and Wheeler decided to leverage that, right? And so they we use this term sometimes, hacked the system. Well, they just typed in the username and password and got access to the network. Then they start, kind of looking around, and they find in one of the systems a thumb drive with a bunch of other usernames and passwords attached to it, and that gets them more and more access. And so this is the methodology a lot of times of just kind of land and expand when it comes to infiltrating different systems. You gain a backdoor through something, and then you spread out from there and see what else you can find. They actually found a pre-release copy of Gears of War. I don't know how many of you guys in the room are gamers or keep close to that, but this was Gears of War 3, I think, on the 360. It was extremely popular. They found it in pre-release form and were able to, I don't know that they actually distributed it. I can't remember the specifics of it, but, gained access to it. Eventually jumped in. They got access to some Microsoft systems, and like I kind of foreshadowed here, government systems where they finally got themselves in trouble. But here's the trick. This network was built on this kind of architecture where we trust everything inside the firewall. So once they got access to one thing, they pretty much had access to everything. And that was the problem. And that is kind of the change that we see going on. When you talk to security professionals, more and more, you're going to hear this buzzword of zero trust. So let me expand on that a little forward. Again, not that I get any money for this, but Net Diaries, I just think it's a fun podcast. So give that a listen if you get a chance. So this is our traditional architecture, and you're probably going to recognize this. I know especially we've got network admins in the room, right? So you've got some kind of core switch, maybe it's redundant, and it goes out to a bunch of IDFs that have, several, maybe stacks of switches here. And then everything has different VLANs assigned to it. So I've got my different devices, maybe some laptops, some IP phones. I've got printers. I've got you guys are going to see my terrible drawings here. But I've got all these different devices, and they break down into maybe a data VLAN, maybe a voice VLAN, probably a printers, IoT, and I probably have some kind of staff and student and guest. And the guests, a lot of times do a nice job with the guest as far as segmenting that off, but pretty much everything else can talk to everything else, right? And so much like in our previous network, where anything behind that firewall is trusted and can get us into trouble, this is how we have architected our networks. Anything inside of here, I just trust that it's okay. The problem is anymore, a lot of these devices kind of come and go, right? Be it an iPad, be it a laptop, they are going to go home to the user's house or to a coffee shop or wherever you can carry them. And they come back and forth to our networks. And so the idea that they would still be trusted after they've left our environment is becoming more and more problematic. We also have, for a long time, had our servers that hang off here. And the only way to access those servers was to be on our network, or maybe this guy, he's VPNing in and he has to go through the firewall to get there. But with different cloud services, a lot of times it's not traversing our network at all, right? I've got servers up in the cloud, be that as infrastructure as a service, such as like AWS and GCP and Azure, where I'm actually pushing my applications up to a server that's just hosted in the cloud, or if it's software as a service. I know a lot of people are G Suite users, especially in the K12 space. Office 365, you get into enterprises and there's Salesforce and all kinds of different, software as a service, things that we use. Dropbox probably comes up commonly. And so, we've kind of lost control a little bit of where everything is. And so this new kind of architecture, and I referenced it before, just as far as a buzzword, is that we have zero trust. We have no trust. I'm not going to trust. Well, let's unpack that a little bit. We tend to divide them into three pillars. I'm not going to trust my workplace, which we tend to define as more of our physical assets on site, our actual physical area. So we're going to talk through different things we can do with our firewalls and with our switches. Oops, excuse me. I'm not going to trust my workloads. So now I'm talking about how do I, and again, getting back to limiting that ability to land and expand. I've got a lot of server to server traffic these days, or machine to machine. How do I trust that one machine that is talking to another machine is doing it appropriately? And how do I put some controls around that? What about my cloud applications? Right, we talked about like G Suite up in the cloud. What controls and kind of monitoring can I put in front of my applications to have them have a zero trust posture towards the rest of the environment? And then the big one, and I'm probably going to spend most of our time on this, just because I think it's most consumable, but my workforce. So this is really my users and their devices. So we can kind of segment our discussion around zero trust and putting our best practices into place based upon these three domains. So let's talk first about workplaces and what this looks like. And I imagine a lot of this, honestly, is going to be review for many of you because there's not necessarily new technologies baked into this. It's more of how are we leveraging the technologies that are available to us to have a policy as an organization that we don't trust anybody just because they're inside our firewall, just because it's a device that we gave somebody. We don't necessarily trust that device, that user, that different credentials, that different are secured like we would expect them to be. So as I go through this, I'll talk about a lot of controls and monitoring that we can do. And anybody who's been doing security for a while, like those are our two levers to pull almost, right? I need to either control and kind of permit, deny some kind of traffic, or I need to monitor so that I can analyze it and figure out, that kind of informs my policies. So the first thing we talk about is, what about network access? Now, most of us, we just got, IDFs with switches plugged in, they're cabled down to the patch panels, which go out to these ports, and people can come and go and plug into those however they please, which it feels like a fairly static environment, but, that may occur. How do I trust that whoever's plugging in should actually be granted access to my network? Again, this is the workplace. This is kind of more my physical locale. So how do they have access to that network? So in this layer, we can talk through something called network access control. Show of hands, who's familiar with network access control? All right, I got I think 80% of the room. Hands are a little small on this side, but I think it was 80%. So again, that's a familiar technology to us. We've heard of it. We've gone down that road before. That is one of the ways that I can apply this kind of zero trust mentality, is looking at network access control. I won't dive into that, other than to say the good thing about this is I can dynamically apply some control policies, some permit deny statements based upon the way the user authenticates. So I can have this user go into VLAN 10, and I can have some ACLs applied, and I can have this user go into VLAN 20 and have certain ACLs applied. And then if they were to switch ports, the proper configuration would kind of follow them. So that's a little bit of network access control. The other thing I can do is dive into some monitoring. So I put this traffic analyzer over here. A lot of times we've seen network taps through the years. And so for the network engineers especially, right, we've used SolarWinds or Prime Infrastructure or What's Up Gold or any number of different monitoring applications that tell us a little bit about what the traffic is on our network. I want to do that, but this is a security conversation. So a lot of those tools can also be leveraged to do some threat analysis. If I know who's talking to who and in what way, I can do some threat analysis. So in thinking back to kind of that Epic Games illustration, David Pecora in this case, he infiltrates one device, and this kind of looks like a user, but let's just say it's a device for now. And then he starts communicating to all the other devices on the network, trying to figure out who he can connect to and who else he can compromise. When you talk about network traffic, that's pretty unusual. A lot of times we do a lot more north to south communication, going out to the internet, going to servers, going to those cloud services, than we ever do communicating to peers on our network. So when you start seeing a device doing that kind of peer-to-peer, horizontal, lateral communication, it can send off some red flags and say, hey, this is something we need to look at and potentially lock down. So that traffic analysis is another way to implement kind of zero trust. I don't, just because it's traversing my wires doesn't mean that it necessarily should be. Let's look at that. Let's analyze that. And then the last thing I would say and encourage is some things that we can do with the firewall. And I'm just going to write NGFW, which stands for Next Generation Firewall. Now you'll see this from all the different vendors. But the important point that I want to bring up is a lot of times these introduce inspections that we didn't used to have. And I'm talking about IPS and then some kind of malware. And the advantage to this is I can still have some antiquated systems say like Windows Server 2003. I can still have that on my network. Now I'm not advising it, but we all get pigeonholed into doing something we don't want to in the IT space from time to time. So somebody somewhere has to have this server maintained. A next generation firewall can put rules in place based upon known vulnerabilities in Windows Server 2003 that prevents specific attacks against that. So we're watching that traffic, and that can get updated automatically behind the scenes, so you don't have to touch it, to give us a better security posture for those devices that shouldn't be that probably shouldn't be on our network, but again, we're kind of pigeonholed into it. So I know there's still some legacy firewalls out there. This is actually a very big deal that we have a more modern firewall, a next generation that can do those kind of inspections. All right, let's jump forward. So zero trust for workloads. Again, I'm looking for kind of controls and monitoring. There's a whole space we could go off into, but I'm going to skip it. And that is for your on-prem and really even your infrastructure as a service solutions. Anytime you're running your own servers and you're running your applications, there's a lot of that machine-to-machine traffic. There's some products that can do some really deep like micro-segmentation and can do some really deep analytics around that. But my sense is, especially in the K12 space, we're moving a lot more to cloud services. So if you have a deployment, sometimes that's required of a larger on-prem. You're looking for that micro segmentation and analytics really to kind of give you some of that zero trust. But let's look at it from kind of the other perspective of what is accessing it. And this would apply to all three of these deployments really, because in the end, I'm hosting some kind of application oftentimes. And so what you can do is put in some policies that dynamically, and I'm going to demo this later, so if this is clear as mud, don't worry, we'll get to an actual visual representation. But one of the things I want to do is establish some trust in both the user and the device that is connecting to me. So I put this illustration down here just to say I've got users and devices all over the place. Again, I'm not just in one location here at the school. I'm going to be at home, I'm going to be at the coffee shop, I'm going to be at a number of places. I also might not be connecting from the same device all the time, right? If I've got credentials to get into my Google Drive, it doesn't matter whether it's my Chromebook or something else that I'm accessing that with. And that's part of the appeal of the solution, but also something we want to keep in mind from a security perspective. And do we actually trust that the device that's accessing it has the same hygiene that the typical device would? And so anytime I'm accessing one of my applications, I want to do some, I'm going to call it device trust, some analytics, some posture assessment to determine, is the software up to date? Is it running the right policies that we have in place? Maybe some kind of antivirus software, or maybe some kind of file encryption running on the local storage, so that it follows the policy we've put in place that we think is a requirement for accessing our applications. You can also do this from a role-based perspective, as far as certain applications are going to be available to certain users, administrators, the IT team, and maybe not the rest of the staff. You can also do it from a device perspective, where somebody has to be logging in with a school-owned device, an organization-owned device, as opposed to their own personal device. And so there's a lot of flexibility there to just kind of ensure that, hey, I've got to set up some ground rules as far as if you're communicating with our applications, this is what I expect before I'm going to trust that you can access those things. Let's move on to then the workforce. So I talked about this being the users and the devices. So at each device level, some of the controls we can have is, it's going to boil down to some kind of an agent, right? Where I have a control agent and I have a monitoring agent acting on the endpoint. So I might want to do some DNS or content filtering so that I know that this device that I've kind of handed over to this user is only going to be used in the proper way and can only access legitimate things. So this is a little bit backwards from the applications because I'm trying to protect the user in this case and the device from being compromised, as opposed from with the applications we looked at, are there any users that are trying to compromise my application? So now we're focusing. So I'm thinking like endpoint protection of some kind with these different. I know Lightspeed is a common one out there. We use secure endpoint. And so there's a couple different ways you can go with that. Usually when you have an agent, you're getting both control, but also monitoring to see if there's any kind of malicious behavior that would then disqualify this person from accessing your different applications. And so, and one of the things that we'll see as well, or I shouldn't say we'll see, but with this kind of monitoring, I can actively, reactively, if I identify some kind of suspicious behavior on the endpoint, kind of revoke their access, right, to all my different applications, maybe to the network. Those kind of back-end communications are available so that our security technologies can kind of work together. All right. And then the last thing is just protecting user credentials. So this was the first part of that Epic Games hack, is somebody's username and password were compromised. And that's a huge thing. For years we've talked about password diversity and just kind of having a different username and password for different websites. Obviously that isn't adhered to 100% of the time. There's different applications like LastPass that can help you manage that. And if you don't do that, I'd encourage you to. But also 2FA or MFA, so two-factor authentication, or multi-factor, you can have 3, 4, 5 factors of authentication if you want, is very much taking over this space to help protect those user credentials. So even if they are compromised, I'm going to require you to have one more factor of authentication to identify that you are who you say you are. And so again, that becomes critical in that Epic Games hack would have been cut off right from the start if there was some kind of 2FA or MFA employed, because David Pecura would have tried to leverage these credentials, across some kind of VPN, and wouldn't have had the user's endpoint device to actually do the 2FA authentication. So that becomes critical. Let's do this. So one of the products that we leverage for this, and I got to switch over here, so bear with me a second, along with a couple of the other things that we looked at. So Duo kind of touts itself as world's easiest and most secure MFA, and they really do a fantastic job. And I think going beyond MFA, we'll look at a couple of the other things, device posture and health, that I kind of referred to earlier. But again, just trying to limit the scope of, okay, a breach has happened, somebody has gained access to our network, to our different applications. How do we make sure they don't go any further? And so MFA is certainly one of the solutions for that. And Duo, if you don't have experience with the app, you can download it. It's free for the first 10 users, so it's perfect for your family to just kind of leverage. Integrates with a ton of apps. Users kind of self-enroll, so obviously managing and setting this up can be a thing. But let me just run through what a push notification for Duo looks like to kind of show you what the experience is. So here we do not have, hold on. Back out of that. All right, we'll try it this way. So here we have, just somebody accessing a particular application, and we're going to type in the email and password, and then just go to sign in. So very much the exact same workflow you're used to, just a pop-up comes up. And at this point, the user's already on board, and this is what you'll see. If anybody's used this on a day-to-day basis, they can attest this is what shows up. I have a couple different options for providing my second factor of authentication from this point, right? I provided username and password. Let's provide a second one. So I can do a duo push, which is just going to push it to my device and say, hey, do you approve? And get some good information on that. I've got it set up on my Apple Watch, so it dings me there, and I just hit approve, and we're off and running. I can do a call me, maybe if I don't have a supported device or something like that, or I just didn't prefer to have an app installed on my personal cell phone. We run into that sometimes. That's fine. Privacy, I get it. It can call you. You can copy down a passcode, which we do a lot with. I think most of us are used to it with banks, for example, right? Where they say, hey, here's your 6-digit code. Type that in, and we'll know it's you. So they'll send you a text message or something like that. So I'm just going to send a push in this case, and it shows up on my phone. It says, hey, I got a login request for our Microsoft Outlook web app. So it gives you a little context of what's going on. That's great. I'm going to unlock my phone, and then it tells me, hey, the username is Chris at Acme Corp. That's logging in. Here is the location that we're seeing you coming from. So it's not North Korea or China or Russia or any of the hot topic ones, and then the location when it happens. So I get a real easy, hey, approve or deny this. And that's it. That's the experience I'm in. I can move forward. And so they tried to make this as simple and as easy and as fluid, really, as can be. One of the advantages of Duo is that it can be integrated across, it seems like countless platforms. So even though there's multiple applications and servers and access methods within your environment, it can kind of all be hosted and give your users the same experience across their different, the different platforms that you utilize. So that is simply the Duo push method. Let's see if I can get back into my slideshow here. And so they also tend to support the broadest range of MFA options. So you can see on the right-hand side here, we saw the phone. I talked about my Apple Watch. You can do a phone call. There are soft tokens, that's, again, applications. There's also hardware tokens. If anybody's familiar with like a YubiKey, it's something a USB stick. So occasionally users don't want to be bothered with putting something on their phone or anything like that. And so you can just do a hardware token, a personal thing that you carry with you. Biometric scans, depending on the platform, you could do your thumbprint or something like that to authenticate who you are. So there's a lot of flexibility there. As I also mentioned, it works with a ton of different applications, whether they're on-prem or cloud applications. You can see there's a long list here, and this is just kind of getting started. So the other thing that is made simple with Duo is this concept of device trust. So I talked about it before. You've got G Suite, you've got different Office 365, your on-prem applications potentially. How do I identify if this device should be allowed to access my systems and kind of protect those systems from infiltrators? So we can assess the health and security and posture of any device. So a lot of the challenges we see is just time, quite often, to try and keep up with patch management. So I know there's tools that are helping with that, but every device across every scenario becomes a challenge. We also see end users tend to access data with their personal, which are unmanaged devices. So I kind of gave that illustration earlier where we're accessing Google Drive, from our Chromebook maybe, but then I'm trying to access it from my personal device as well, or Dropbox or any of the other services out there. Should I allow access from personal devices, or users just don't want to give admins any kind of control of personal devices, which is understandable. I don't know that I'm in favor of that either. So this is where Duo comes to help, because it can kind of sit in between those applications. When you're doing your MFA authentication, there's some native information that's passed back and forth that will give you insight into that. So let me see if I can demonstrate that quickly. So this is our access control device, and we're going to see we're just accessing our particular application here. I'm going to type in my username and password and hit login, and it just gives me a prompt. And it says, hey, we're sorry. Access is not allowed because you have out-of-date software. So in this case, I want to see what's allowed. So I can click down further. There's some instructions on here, and it says, hey, Firefox is out of date. So much of our applications are browser-based now, and browser-based vulnerabilities are a huge, potential for bad actors to work through. And so you can put policies in place to just say, hey, you need to be in this update or the previous one. Maybe you can be 2 revisions behind or 3 revisions behind. But after that, we're not going to support connectivity to our environment beyond that, because we need people to be in the business of updating the software. And so sure enough, it gives you a prompt here and says, hey, latest version required. Your version is 24 days out of date. We can also, and I'm trying to think, is it in this demo? I don't think so. I'll go to the next one. So there's also, that was an out-of-date software release. But we also talk about trusted endpoints individually. So I've got my username and password here again. Somebody clicks sign in. It says, hey, we're sorry. Access is not allowed because you're using a personal device. So again, the difference between somebody's, and it's very clear, right? There shouldn't be a confusion. Somebody might open a help desk ticket about this, but it's very clear on what the justification for that is. And hopefully there's a policy in place that kind of directs this. Now, I said there might be help desk tickets, and that is really the concern, especially for those of you in the room, because new technology is great, security is great, but anytime we put up roadblocks in connectivity, users are reaching out and trying to figure it out. So Duo has tried to streamline this by having self-guided remediation. And I'll walk you through what an example of that looks like. So users coming in, I type in my email address here, click next, type in my password, I click next, and I get this prompt, and it says, you know what? Here we go. Well, actually, I skipped forward a little bit, so let me work with this real quickly. What it is doing some inspections based upon the traffic that comes back, and based upon the capability I have in this browser. Duo is doing some quick analysis to say, hey, your operating system's up to date, your system password is set, file vault is enabled, but your firewall is not. And that's actually a policy that we have, that you have to have your firewall enabled. Looks like you turned that off for some reason. Let's make sure you get that back on. So there's some posture assessment, some compliance checking here that's going on. Now, again, I started by saying, hey, this is going to elicit a lot of help desk tickets potentially. But it says action required. So I can click on this. It's fairly intuitive. And it gives you actually guided steps of exactly what you're going to do, okay? You're going to open firewall preferences. All right, let's click on that. Open firewall preferences. Click on the lock in the lower left corner of the window. Great, I can do that. And I got to type in my password again. It's fine. And then click Turn on Firewall. Turn on Firewall. All right. And then refresh your browser and try logging on again. All right, let's refresh. Let's check again. And now I'm in, because I actually met all those compliancy steps. So in an effort to reduce, some of the challenges that might come with it, Duo's done a terrific job of giving those self-guided steps. And they really do a terrific, service with this. Even their internal documentation for administrators and managers of the platform, Duo might have the best documentation that I've come across. They're very clear, very detailed in their explanations, and they try and make it almost a point-click affair to get done what you're trying to do. And so that self-guided remediation goes a long way with users in making it seamless and as painless as it can be. Let's jump back here. What else did I want to go through? The other thing I wanted to highlight from a kind of posture assessment, sometimes a client's posture changes. Now, you've got to be in the Cisco bandwagon on this one. Duo and Secure Endpoint do work together behind the scenes, though, so that Secure Endpoint identifies malicious, any malware on the system, that you can revoke those privileges automatically behind the scenes and inform Duo, hey, they should not be authenticated to this application, to this service any longer. So that kind of, I love seeing this automatic technology come into place, and we're seeing it more and more through artificial intelligence, machine learning, where it really takes the burden of off some kind of security administrator and just applies those policies automatically. And you can dictate how strict or how lenient you want to be with that, but that capability does exist. We also just protect every application. And so sometimes you run into compatibility issues, but I talked about it a little bit before, where it's covering everything, and then there's these kind of adaptive policies that you can put in place as far as, is this the right user? Is this the right device? What level of trust should be given to them based upon their authentication credentials? And so that can vary from one user's device to another. So I might enter the same username and password, but if I'm coming from my personal device, I'm going to authenticate only to a certain set of applications. Or if I'm coming from a school device, maybe I'm granted a little bit more because we know those devices are managed. They've always got their firewalls on, for example. They're running our endpoint protection, so we feel a little more comfortable with the activities that they're going through. The other thing that's powerful is you get access to a back-end page. And so this is an analytics engine that evaluates both historical but also contextual patterns. So I mentioned before that, I'm blanking on his name, our hacker friend there, Pacoma? I can't remember. Anyway, he did a land and expand on the network, and his lateral movement wouldn't be expected. So that's an example of a contextual access pattern. Within the context of him being this user on this device, he's not generally moving laterally. So a Duo is going to see the historical changes to say, hey, this device normally communicates during business hours or something like that. And right now it's trying to connect at 3 a.m. But it's also going to say contextually, hey, this device is connecting from a foreign country or something. So they give you access to this information through the Duo Trust Monitor page, and then you can identify particular risk criteria that you want to evaluate here. So I think I have this one up as a quick demo as well. I can come in here and create a risk profile, and I just go through and I choose. Again, Duo does a great job of just kind of guiding you through things. Okay, choose your highest value application. All right, let's go through here and click, which ones are particularly important to me. So in this case, I'm looking at GitLab and AWS and something called Snowflake. So I've selected those. Those are my favorite applications. Next, I look at my user groups with a lot of access or maybe provisional credentials I'm more concerned about, where they're handed out only sparingly. And so I can click on these different groups that I want to pay a little bit closer attention to, if you will. Then I go through the location and IPs. Again, I'm looking for high-risk countries that are suspicious. So let's go ahead and type those in. North Korea, China, Russia, Ukraine, the usual suspects here, right? I might have some low-risk IPs of different partners or vendors, or users that I know this is your home address or something like that, that I can configure here. I can go through and identify kind of non-authentication events, which they detail, right? These are higher risk security events that are not directly tied to user authentication. Do I want to enable that? I can put always, and then just kind of review my settings and apply selections. So now I'm looking at AWS, GitLab, and Snowflake. I've got several groups, and I'm going to monitor those and look through my security events page to try and call attention to those. So, a lot of programs will do some kind of top 10 events or something like that, but there's no intelligence around it as far as, is this really useful to me? So this allows us to kind of tweak those policies and gear them towards what's specifically of interest to you and your organization. All right. And I know we're getting to the end here. Oh, and that's actually it. I'm missing my joke slide at the end. There we go. Unhide. So hopefully that was of help to you. I'll allow you to be distracted with a few jokes that are sitting here. To wrap it up, zero trust. I know that's a buzz term that's been out there. It is really about an attitude in how we approach leveraging our security technologies. If you gain anything out of this session today, I would ask that you start thinking about users even within your firewall as users that should not be trusted. So I don't care where you're coming from. I want to put you through some authentication steps. A great way that we've found to do that is using Duo to do that kind of multi-factor authentication, as well as some device health posture assessment. So if any of you heard what I said in the last 30 seconds, great. If not, here's some fantastic jokes for you to end your heck journey on. In light of customer data's breach, Capital One unveiled a new slogan today. Who's in your wallet? I like that one.
I like it.
Hey, thank you very much. I'm Jeremy Ryder with NSI. Obviously, if you have any follow-up questions, I'm happy to take them now.
Yes.
Otherwise, you can reach out to any of our account managers if they come to mind later. What do you call a secret agent fashion show? Spyware. See? All right. Maybe I'll go quiet for the next few minutes.
Yeah.